Westholme is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westholme.com.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
This is What Doesn't Kill You, Food Industry Insights. I'm your host, Katie Keeper. And guess what we're talking about today, people? Yes, you know, we're talking about water. Yes, water, my favorite subject. Eric Cantor, my guest today, is the Government Relations Director of Clean Wisconsin. And as Government Relations Director, and boy, we need more of you guys, Eric Cantor guides Clean Wisconsin's legislative and policy initiatives through the state legislature and state agencies. His knowledge of the legislative process and relationships with key state officials support the advancement of Clean Wisconsin's policymaking goals. Prior to joining Clean Wisconsin, Eric lobbied at a Madison-based government relations firm for several legislative sessions. He advocated on behalf of a diverse group of clients, including renewable energy developers and some of the state's leading public health organizations. Eric, thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to have you on the show. I'm super excited to talk about this.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, as you do not know, but as many of my listeners do know, I have been on a tear about water quality in the United States, maybe for the last year. I'm sure Armin, who is my regular engineer, is totally sick of hearing about this. But I think it is one of the most pressing issues of our time, and especially in the Farm Belt, where I've repeatedly interviewed a journalist named Keith Schneider, who's based in, I think, Michigan. And he has written extensively about Farm Belt contaminations, mostly about nitrates, but every once in a while he strays into the PFAS territory. And that's what we're going to talk about today is PFAS, otherwise known as forever chemicals, are to be found in significant numbers in Wisconsin wells. So before we get into the PFAS thing, tell us about your organization a little bit and a little bit more about your role with negotiating and lobbying with state legislators, because that's not such an easy job.
Sure. Well, like you said, my name is Eric Cantor. I work for Clean Wisconsin. Clean Wisconsin is a 54-year-old organization. We were actually founded on the first Earth Day back in 1970.
Oh, no kidding.
We're a staff of about 25 with offices in Madison and Milwaukee, really covering the gambit of environmental advocacy. So we we have a water and agriculture program. We have a climate, energy, and air program. Mm-hmm. Our work in Milwaukee is our Resilient Communities program, doing work there to install green infrastructure in neighborhoods around the city, in the city. We also have a legal department who gets involved in cases before the dockets before the Public Service Commission here in the state. Also get involved with various environmental legal challenges both at the state and the federal level. And in my role as government relations director, I lead our advocacy before the state legislature. I also dabble a little bit on some federal advocacy, but my bread and butter is really here in the state. And so I don't know how much your listeners know about Wisconsin legislative landscape, but we have been controlled by our state legislature has been controlled by Republicans in both houses since 2011. We recently underwent remapping, new redistricting. And we'll see how the elections play out here in November and see, how that shakes out. But we have a Democratic governor, we have a Republican legislature, and obviously that can create some tension.
Yeah.
And my job is to navigate that tension. And, I've been pretty heartened to see that for the most part on a lot of issues, and I guess we'll get into this later, and I'll contradict myself, but in many cases, clean water has been a pretty bipartisan issue here in the state. Perhaps this particular issue being the exception, but we can talk about that later.
We will talk about that later because, it's not just the PFAS, but you guys also have significant nitrate issues. But that's another thing we'll talk about later. But so now that we've gotten to that, we're going to talk about what you guys have gotten your wind up about, which is the forever chemicals that have emerged as a significant public health issue. So can you talk a little bit about sort of the levels of contamination? Where are they? I know La Crosse, Wisconsin, which, believe it or not, I've actually visited. Um, and I happen to, and the reason I visited, Eric, is because I went to a foundry there. And I
Okay.
can easily imagine a foundry being a big source of PFAS, but I'm just speaking off the top of my head. And then you also have a lot of you manufacture a lot of outerwear with ripstop nylon there, and perhaps that is also a PFAS contributor.
So sure, I'll start with sort of where the contamination is. So the there's been broad testing among public water systems in the state, and that's really been spurred by a drinking water maximum contaminant level that the Wisconsin DNR set a couple of years ago. And because of that rule, testing was required in public water systems across the state. And what has been found over the course of a couple of years is 30% of systems tested for PFAS.
Hmm.
We have 72 counties in the state, but one of the counties actually doesn't have any public water systems because it's so rural.
Wow.
So it's 70 of the 71 counties with public drinking water systems had PFAS in them. And then of those 30% of systems that tested positive, 5% of those were above the EPA maximum contaminant level that was recently set of 4 parts per trillion. And those, there are some definite hotspots in the state,
Yeah.
primarily being Peshtigo and Marinette, which are close to the Michigan's Upper Peninsula in northeastern Wisconsin on the Bay of Green Bay. The town of Campbell, which is, as you mentioned, out by La Crosse. It's actually an island.
Oh, really?
The town of Campbell is on French Island, which is actually an island in the middle of the Mississippi River.
Wow.
Wausau, Wisconsin, in sort of north central Wisconsin, and then a very small town of 644 people in the town of Stella, which is in northeastern Wisconsin. So, we're talking anywhere from 644 people in the town of Stella to around 40,000 people in Wausau and sort of everywhere in between as far as Peshtigo, Marinette, and the town of Campbell. So those are really the hot spots, I would say, that we know of right now.
Right.
And to your point about where this is coming from, there are a few ways that it gets into groundwater, but primarily, at least as we've seen in the town of Campbell near La Crosse, and Peshtigo and Marinette, it's really been due to testing of firefighting foams.
Oh, really?
Yes, and so there's a company a company in Marinette called Tyco, and Tyco they manufacture firefighting foams.
Yep.
PFAS has been in firefighting foams for a long time, or at least it was. And that company was testing firefighting foams on their campus from 1962 to 2017. So that's a lot of years.
Whoa.
Which PFAS was getting into the environment in that
Right.
area. And so that's the issue in Peshtigo and Marinette. In the town of Campbell, although it's a relatively small island in the middle of the Mississippi River, very near La Crosse, it does have its own airport. And there were a couple instances where the local fire department was doing practice exercises on, basically setting planes on fire, doing practice exercises, and blasting a lot of firefighting foam
Right.
into these practices, and that's where that contamination has come from. In other places, like the little town of Stella, it's not so clear where that's coming from.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, that doesn't, I mean, I can only imagine that being an agricultural area, which would say, to me, they'd be nitrate polluted more than they would be PFAS polluted, but maybe they're lucky and they get both.
Well, maybe they're lucky. Another way that PFAS gets into the environment is through biosolid spreading on agricultural fields.
Oh, really?
And biosolid, I don't know how much you or your listeners know, but biosolids are really a product that comes out of wastewater treatment.
Right.
Nutrients are taken out they're made safe, and they're spread either as sort of fertilizer or soil amendment on agricultural fields. And a lot of times that wastewater can have PFAS in it. They end up in the biosolids. The biosolids are spread on fields, and that's how PFAS has been shown to enter the environment.
You know what I've also learned from Keith Schneider, who is a frequent guest here, is that when you spread those the treated manure, what you're talking about essentially is treated manure from primarily from concentrated animal feeding operations, and the nitrates are actually concentrated even more through that process. And so when you're spreading that manure, apparently not only are you getting PFAS, but you're getting a higher concentration of nitrates than you would if you were just spreading liquid manure from a lagoon the way they normally do, that hadn't been through a wastewater treatment process. I mean, you're just sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't. And you guys don't have any military installations up there. That's another big culprit in the PFAS thing, and the dry cleaning industry.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I mean, it's just an incredible thing. So once the extent of this problem emerged, because we're going to get to the nut of the thing here.
Sure.
In 2023, $125 million was allocated by the legislature to help clean up these contaminated sites. Tell us that story. What happened then? They got the 125, and then what?
Well, so you're right. There was emerging interest in the issue. There were some relatively not small, I guess it's not fair to say small, but there were some pieces of legislation in the legislative session prior to 2023, so the 21-22 session. There was a bill on a firefighting foam take-back program that would help local fire departments dispose of their PFAS-containing firefighting foam. And so there were some efforts in that session, but then it was really in the 2023-2024 session, and they're adjourned now. But prior to adjournment, where we saw some real interest in making some investments. And so during the state's biennial budget setting process, which is a long drawn-out process that we could spend the entire podcast just talking about the budget process. But essentially, the legislature allocated $125 million for PFAS cleanup.
Right.
And that was great.
That seems good. Yeah. It's not that much money. Sounds like a lot to you and me. For the average citizen, yes, $125 million windfall would be an incredible life-changing event. But $125 million in terms of cleaning up contaminated water systems in municipalities, maybe not so much, right?
Right. So it sounded, at the moment it was a great thing without question.
Sure. It's better than nothing.
Bipartisan support for it. It was, at the moment, it was voted, into the budget by the legislature's Joint Committee on Finance. There were comments made, that this is a down payment, leading everyone in the room watching to believe that there would be more coming at some point. And really what has happened with that $125 million since that time, not a penny has gone anywhere to anybody.
Really?
Yes. It is sitting in an account, and it hasn't moved. And that is due to that's primarily due to a bill that came out after the fact called Senate Bill 312. Mm-hmm. The budget bill itself didn't explain to the Wisconsin's Department of Natural Resources how to actually spend that money. It just allocated it. So it required a follow-up bill to create the framework by which the department could spend that money.
Got it.
And that came about in a bill that ended up being called Senate Bill 312. And it was an omnibus bill on PFAS, and really it got at creating that framework for that money to be spent. It is worth noting, though, that nothing in that bill actually appropriated that money either. So though it created this framework and everyone was saying this is how we're going to spend the money, there wasn't actually a line in that bill that said, appropriating from this account to do these things. So it's a little unclear to people like me what the plan was had that bill actually passed. But just to talk about that bill a little bit, it was an omnibus bill. From Clean Wisconsin's standpoint, from my standpoint personally, there were some things in that bill that we liked. There was a grant program for municipalities to help upgrade their wastewater treatment and their drinking water systems
Right.
to deal with PFAS. There ended up, through various amendments, there ended up being a program that would have helped Wisconsonites on private wells, and I think we'll talk about that more later too. But a third of Wisconsonites get their drinking water from a private well. So it would have gone to help people on private wells. And so there were good things that we saw of how this money could be spent and actually get to people and to municipalities and actually help them. And then there was really a poison pill provision section of the budget that would have weakened the state's, we call it the spills law. And really the spills law is the state law by which the Department of Natural Resources is able to hold polluters accountable when a harmful chemical is spilled into the environment. That bill basically carved PFAS out of that law and would have treated PFAS differently than any other chemical under the spills law. As you can guess, for Clean Wisconsin and for other environmental advocates and for the people, most importantly, for the people in the communities who deal with PFAS contamination every day, that was really a non-starter. And that we couldn't just sort of let that go. And the government couldn't let it go either. And so when the bill passed, it was vetoed. And here we sit without any help to anybody at the moment.
Jeez. I mean, I have to say I'm going to editorialize, which if you ever come on this show again, you'll know that I do this on the regular. I'm sure it's very annoying and boring for the listeners, but I'm just marveling that they would stick such a provision into this bill where the polluters don't have to pay and the burden of cleaning up for them is on the taxpayer. And I just don't get why the Republican Party is so bent on protecting industry at the expense of their constituents. Okay, I said it. So, I mean, to go back again to the 125 million that was allocated, and hopefully will be, in a new bill, be reallocated. What would you actually think would be an appropriate sum of money to fund these efforts? And also, wait, before you answer that, let me ask a second question, because then you can respond to both. Do you have more nitrate pollution than PFAS? And if so, is nitrate pollution being also addressed theoretically in one of these drinking water quality bills?
So I'll take the first part of that question first on how much money would it actually take to provide clean drinking water to everyone in the state, or at least PFAS free. Well, PFAS safe drinking
nitrate
water
free
and nitrate free. Let me take the PFAS one first.
Okay.
I don't know what that would cost, frankly. Okay. And what would be required is so we've tested the municipal drinking water systems. We have not tested all of the private wells in the state. And so we don't know, and that's really because of that's additional lack of action for people on private wells in the state. So we don't know the totality of the problem. So I don't know what it would cost to remediate every contaminated well. I don't know what the cost is. I don't know that an analysis has yet been done to say, okay, here are the municipalities who have a problem. Here's the current state of their drinking water systems. Here's the upgrades that would be needed. And here's how much that's going to cost, one of them. And now we need to add up everybody. But I guess that's the way that I would go about, trying to figure out how much money this would actually take, how much money it would cost. But it's a lot. I mean, you're right. $125 million is not the number.
Drop in the bucket, honestly.
There's been studies done that have shown that to actually clean it up out of the environment, which is different than, making sure that water infrastructure is able to filter it or treat it or whatever.
Right. That's a whole separate technology, right?
Right. there's been studies that have shown, though, to remove PFAS from the environment in its entirety, there is essentially not enough money in the world currently to do that. So this is an incredibly widespread problem and an incredibly expensive problem.
Oh yeah.
And so I can't give you a number on what it would take to do it. I don't know if someone at the DNR or someone at the Legislative Fiscal Bureau or anybody else is crunching those numbers based on the available testing and data that we have.
Mm-hmm.
But Clean Wisconsin has not done that analysis, at least, and it would require a lot of work in talking to a lot of different public water systems to figure out what upgrades they need.
Yeah, I mean, I know that.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that here in Rhode Island, a couple of years ago, we passed legislation that, first of all, mandated that every municipal water system was tested, and that any system that is found, under, exceeding the EPA limits for PFAS, now has to invest in remediation, and part of that is subsidized by the state, and I believe part of that is subsidized by the IRA, by the big infrastructure bill, the Investment Recovery Act. I mean, this is sort of the moment when, the Biden administration, I mean, God forbid he does not win, but, that money is going to go away. I mean, and so I'm always stunned by states that, and you have a Democratic governor who is not like grabbing their piece of the pie, whether they think they need it or not. You know what I mean? Like, is you have Governor Tony Evers, right?
Yep, Tony Evers. Yep.
Yeah. And he seems like a good guy. He seems like he's been a good governor for Wisconsin. It looks like Wisconsin is kind of purple now, not red, right?
Definitely purple. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I just, as usual, digress. But the other thing that struck me in doing the research for this is that in 2022, your Natural Resources Board voted down groundwater standards for PFAS contamination. And that's prior to the EPA categorizing those 6 out of a category of thousands of chemicals that are in widespread use. But those particular 6. So they changed those standards. They upheld the surface water standards at 3 times the recommended level of contamination. Can you explain that to me? Like, what just happened here? They get the word from EPA. Here is what is an acceptable level of contamination to prevent public health disasters. And then they say, oh no, those scientists don't know what they're talking about. We're going to make it 3. Maybe next year we'll make it 5. Maybe in the next session we'll make it 10. I mean, what is going on?
So there is a lot going on there. So,
sorry.
No, that's all right. So that was an interesting day.
I'll
A
bet.
lot of us in the office were watching the Natural Resources Board, and the Natural Resources Board at that time still had a number of members, a majority of members that were still fulfilling their term, although one of them was not, and that's a whole different story. But they were still fulfilling their term on terms that had been appointed by previous Governor Scott Walker,
right? A Republican, right?
Right, and then there was a minority of members appointed by Governor Evers, and so it was a split board. And so to take the drinking water standards first, you're right. It was recommended by the DNR to set the again, this was before the EPA set its MCLs. That was very recently, just earlier this year.
Yeah,
so
right.
A couple of years ago. So DNR was recommending an MCL for the state of 20 parts per trillion.
Right.
But the board ended up at 70 parts per trillion.
Right.
And
the new standard.
The new standard is 4. and so
I rest my case, Judge.
Right.
I mean,
and so, how they ended up at 70, that's a long story, but they felt the need to engage in this back and forth, and they ended up at 70, and everyone was really disappointed, but everyone sort of said, well, at least we have some standard, and at least this will get testing going, which it did.
Okay.
But now obviously we're at 4, and the state despite the rule still says 70, but
Yeah.
because EPA and the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Drinking Water Act, supersedes the state's rule at 70. Now all public water systems in the state and across the country are at 4.
Right.
And to get to the groundwater standard, there was a proposed groundwater standard. The NRB, the Natural Resources Board, decided not to implement a standard
Really?
at all. And so what that means is that for the 1/3 of Wisconsinites who get their clean drinking water or who get their drinking water from a private well, there is no standard for their water. There is a standard for their water for nitrate. There's a standard for their water for bacteria contamination. There are standards for all kinds of things in private wells. But the board really, at the behest of business groups in the state, there was no groundwater standard set for PFAS for private wells.
Okay, so Eric, explain to me, why are they protecting? I mean, who is the industry group that is being protected by failing to hold them accountable for PFAS contamination? Like, this is not is this an agricultural group? It's okay. I get the firefighting foam, whatever. You can't, firefighters have to do what they have to do. But so who is backing, essentially profit over people here?
Well, so firefighting foam, that is a huge deal. Nobody here is blaming, I should say, nobody that I know of is blaming a farmer for spreading the biosolid that they were allowed to spread. Nobody's blaming, I wouldn't say anybody's blaming agriculture. There are, certain manufacturers, you're talking about manufacturers earlier. There's a lot of paper manufacturers in Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
PFAS is used in paper manufacturing.
Right.
Food packaging.
Mm-hmm.
You pointed out apparel companies and waterproof clothing.
Right.
I guess I hesitate to just say manufacturers at large, but it's sort of manufacturers at large, and maybe acutely to some extent the paper industry.
Okay. I'm just wondering, like, who are these legislators responding to when they put their constituencies at risk? And so before we go back to that, we're going to take a short break for a sponsor drop, and we'll be right back with Eric Cantor. Stay tuned. We have more to talk about here.
Whether you're a chef or just love going to restaurants, you know the best ingredients are everything, especially when it comes to beef. In Northern Australia, there's a different approach to raising high-quality beef. Westholme, based in Queensland and Northern Territory, is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme stewards 16 million acres of rangeland guided by their natural ecosystem. They're led by a belief that if they balance the needs of their cattle with the needs of the environment, both can thrive. Westholme's team of rangeland experts and nature managers use a variety of tools to monitor and respond to the welfare of the environment, like satellites that assess grass health and on-the-ground research. Cattle are happier when they have the freedom to forage and explore, so Westholme ensures that they can roam wild, foraging at will for the first 2 to 3 years of their lives. Their cows graze on native grasses like Mitchell grass, which is only found in Australia, along with dozens of other plants, herbs, and seasonal legumes. The result is a high-quality Wagyu beef that reflects the terroir of Northern Australia and a flavor suited to complement any cuisine. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westhome.com.
Okay, so we're saying that essentially your state legislature is, a Republican-controlled state legislature that appears to be in the pocket. Although it's not unique to Republicans to reward their donors. Everybody does it. But it does seem to be skewed heavily towards the Republican Party where the population comes second to the profits of whoever is giving them their big campaign donations. That's been my observation. Anyway, so they've given up they've withheld the cleanup funds that have been allocated, such as they are. How are your communities who are polluted dealing with this? Are they all drinking bottled water? I mean, and who's paying for that?
Yes, is the answer. They are drinking bottled water. That has been funded by the DNR.
Department of Natural
relying on-
Resources. Okay.
Right, Department of Natural Resources.
So in other words, the taxpayer is paying because that obviously that organization is funded by taxpayer dollars, right?
Right. I don't mean to. I actually believe that in the case of Marinette and Peshtigo, I'm not positive on this, but I actually do believe that Tyco to some extent might be paying for some of that bottled water. But the point being is that folks are on bottled water. In places like the town of Campbell, the DNR is certainly paying for that.
Mm-hmm.
And in the town of Campbell, to go back to what you were saying about federal money being available to upgrade water systems. So everyone in the town of Campbell up to this point has been on a private well. But utilizing funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law, the town was able to get funding to drill into a deep water aquifer to see if they could essentially set up their own municipal drinking water system.
Wow.
And the test results of that, they were successfully able to drill. And the test results from that drilling did show that the aquifer that they drilled into didn't have any trace of PFAS. So it does appear to be a safe drinking water source.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, right now you have, people drinking bottled water. And in some cases you have towns sort of taking it on themselves to seek federal grants to install entirely new drinking water infrastructure. So it's, in the face of no state dollars, there are, at least the town of Campbell is trying to find a way to move forward. But obviously, money from the state would certainly go a long way to supplementing what the town of Campbell is trying to do.
Sure.
And in other places, hopefully, it would get people off bottled water. In the city of Wausau, they are doing infrastructure upgrades themselves. That obviously has been passed on to water ratepayers, and so water rates have gone up, which people in the most recent municipal election in Wausau, the previous mayor there, who actually said we need to test our system, and who sort of took that step to test the system and find out that it was contaminated and then lead an effort to supply clean drinking water to the city, she actually lost because people were upset about the rates on their water.
Of course, understandably.
It's an interesting political issue that we've.
It is. I mean, last week I was talking to Mary Grant from Food and Water Watch, and her point about mayors and municipal water systems, because I asked her a question about why would a town ever bring in an outside entity to manage their water supply. Well, it turns out that the water supply entity pays the town for the privilege, because then they can jack the rates or do whatever they want. So they end up making a lot of money. But the mayor ends up getting money that they can then use towards other projects. So it always seems like a great idea to have a secondary water, a secondary entity managing water. So it's really interesting how people are so, really in the dark about how their water supply arrives in their tap, I think is really the problem, don't you? I mean, I think a public education initiative to try to explain to people how municipal water supplies work would be very helpful for everybody, especially when it comes to elections like the one you just described.
Right.
Anyway,
no, absolutely.
let me go. So, but to stay on that political track for just a second, because of course that's what interests me. I'm completely obsessed right now with politics, as is, I hope, the rest of the country, or at least the rest of the Democrats. But how are people likely, in the face of sort of, for example, this particular egregious example of the Republicans trying to jam a poison pill into a piece of good legislation to, hold these hold these polluters basically free of any kind of accountability. How is that playing in your constituencies? Are people seeing that play out? Do they understand that that's what's happening? Or are they kind of unaware and indifferent? It's not getting enough coverage or whatever it is. What's the population, response to this?
Well, I can tell you that the people in the communities are very upset, and there have been some very very active individuals and active groups
Good.
in the communities. There's an organization called SOH2O, Save Our Water, in the Marinette-Peshtigo area. They've been very very active, and they are rightfully very upset. I've been on a lot of calls with those folks, and it's just sad, frankly. I feel awful for them, and I wish there was more that I could do. And we're trying to help as much as we possibly can.
Sure.
But it's difficult. How it's playing out in the rest of the state, areas that aren't affected by PFAS as much, I'm not. Frankly, I'm not sure. I do know that, there is the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel is the largest newspaper in the state. The Milwaukee Journal Sentinel regularly runs articles about PFAS. I know that in speaking to our communications director, Clean Wisconsin has 20,000 members across the state. And in speaking to our communications director, the communications that we do on PFAS, be it, stuff, press releases or podcasts or videos or things on Instagram or social media, PFAS is routinely, our members are routinely, it's one of the issues they're most interested in. And so this is certainly an issue that I think people know about and are concerned about. And while it's not right in the taps of every Wisconsinite in the state, people are aware and they know what it is. And I think they see the lack of action as disappointing and, ranging from disappointing to eye rolling, typical political gridlock, and then, down to the people affected every day, just flat out anger.
Well, I think it's criminal myself. I honestly think it's a criminal act to fail to clean up a drinking water supply.
Sure.
To me, is criminal. And it should be prosecuted as a criminal act. But let's talk for a minute, because we're going to have to wrap this up shortly. But let's talk about the recent Supreme Court decision to overturn Chevron versus the Natural Resources Defense Council. How does that play out in terms of your battle to force polluters to both clean up their act and also pay for the cleanup instead of putting it onto ratepayers?
I think when it comes to the things we've talked about today, and, all of it being, with the exception of the EPA, MCLs, all of it being, everything else being state level lawmaking, I don't think the ruling really affects that too much. And even when we look at the MCL, the EPA MCLs, the EPA clearly has statutory authority to set those kind of MCLs. And so any challenge to the MCL is more so going to be based on, whether the science is there to justify the 4 parts per trillion, rather than sort of an argument that, in the wake of overturning Chevron, the statute is ambiguous about whether EPA has authority to do this at all. I don't really think anybody's thinking that. But on other things that the EPA especially has tried to do on PFAS, there's certainly a threat that the overturning Chevron could disrupt that. Whether it's, if you look at CERCLA, the Superfund law, and things that they have, that law has recently contemplated regarding cleanup and PFAS. Who knows if that'll see a challenge in the wake of this? And so that's bad for Wisconsin, but that's bad for everybody.
Absolutely.
And so, at least in Wisconsin, we can continue to push forward with trying to do something, and Chevron won't get in the, or, a lack of Chevron won't get in the way.
Right.
But certainly on anything the EPA looks to do on PFAS, nitrates, pick your contaminant.
Right.
We're all in danger. And so it's obviously that was unfortunately perhaps not a surprising outcome, but certainly an incredibly frustrating outcome.
Well, people are going to be, Republicans and Democrats alike will all be affected by dirty water, dirty air, and contaminated food, because that's what we're talking about here. Oh,
Sure.
and did I mention drugs? Because I mean, it seems to me that even drug manufacturing could be impacted by this ruling, because what you're saying essentially is that experts aren't experts, and any old fool can say what the standard is, and if they have enough political clout, they can jam it through. So, I mean, to me, this is like one of the more disastrous events of the past 6 weeks.
Sure, absolutely. It's
just like, I mean, oh my God, could we get any more far away from? I mean, I'm only hoping that it's the worst. It's the darkest before the dawn is what I'm hoping for. I did not ask you one very significant question, which I guess I somehow missed or forgot to ask you in this outline. What do you see in these contaminated communities? Are you seeing, or has it been studied, is there an epidemiological study that shows cancer clusters in those areas? The way, for example, my buddy Keith Schneider has highlighted cancer clusters in Minnesota, in Iowa, et cetera, in areas that have heavy concentrations of nitrates. I mean, we haven't talked about PFAS so much, but certainly of nitrates. Are you seeing that across Wisconsin at all?
So, to my knowledge, that kind of study has not happened.
I see.
But in the town of Campbell, I guess I just keep reverting to the town of Campbell. But there's a woman there. She's on the town board. She's an incredibly smart and passionate advocate. Her name is Lee Donahue. If you ever want to talk more about PFAS in Wisconsin, you should talk to Lee Donahue.
Okay.
And she came to me with DC. She came with me to DC. I don't know, 9 months ago or something, and we were doing congressional visits. And in the course of those visits, and just sort of chatting on the side, she told me that a staggering number of people on her street alone, just her street, have had cancer or died of cancer. And it's in numbers that seem more than anecdotal. And I'm not a scientist. We have a staff scientist here at Clean Wisconsin. And so, I'm not saying that we can all say for certain that was due to PFAS in the water, but she had people on her street who were very sick, and she had a lot of people on her street who were very sick. And I guess take that as the anecdote you will, but it's more than a little interesting, and hopefully some studies are conducted here soon.
Well, who would pay for that? Who's going to pay for a study? I know we have to go, but who would pay for that? If you don't have a legislature that can even release $125 million for cleanup efforts without injecting a poison pill into it, I mean, who is going to allocate money for studies that will show that that whether it's nitrates, PFAS, or any other chemical that happens to be prevalent in your water systems, who will pay for that kind of epidemiological study that would point the finger at the industries that are responsible for these contaminated sites? I just don't see it happening. Do you?
I think your assessment that it would be difficult to convince the legislature to use public dollars for that, it would be very difficult.
And yet, if I were the public, I would say that's where I want my tax money to go. I don't want it to go to clean up after some other industry. I want it to go to see, exactly who is responsible for the umpteen cases of cancer in my community. Sure. And all kinds of cancers, right? It's all different kinds. I mean, nitrates cause all different kinds of cancers. I don't know about PFAS as much, but I mean, breast, bowel, colon, kidney, testicular. I mean, really, almost every organ system is affected by these chemicals. So it's, it's just like, where do you start with this? Well, Eric, listen, thank you so much for this. It's a very interesting conversation. I really wish you the best with this. Let's stay in touch and keep me posted on what happens. Come back, we'll talk about it again. I mean, eventually I'd like to do a whole roundtable with a bunch of you guys from the farm states to talk about this. Have you read The Swine Republic yet?
I have not, no.
Okay, well, when we finish the show, I'll tell you about that, because you should absolutely tune into that. And so should your entire staff at Clean Water, and so should every Wisconsinite, because it's by a guy from Iowa. He's like the canary in the coal mine, screaming his head off. Anyway, very many thanks to you for this. And thanks, as always, to my sponsors for supporting this show. And thanks to all my listeners for tuning in. Really appreciate your support. And we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye for now. What Doesn't Kill You, Food Industry Insights, is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.